launch into anything, are there any sort of questions or comments about last week before I move on to new stuff? Nothing. Okay. I'm just trying to find. There you are. Okay. All right then. Well, that's okay anyway, because I'm going to do a quick review to build on. It's not going to work. Okay, no worries. Last week I forgot this. This week I brought it and it doesn't work. Okay. Yeah, I did it with the. Okay, doesn't matter. Your problems, my problems don't have to be your problems, right? So the last week we talked about this, right? I was presenting this kind of timeline, I guess, of how we engage with objects and what happens. And overall, I gave like this. There's me. I encounter an object of some kind. I immediately start to develop an evaluation of that as being positive, negative, neutral. One of those three. There's no other option. These three. And then that's really, really far, right? And then from there, emotions might arise. Different types of emotions. And then even from there, we can end up with go a bit further and talk about mental disorders, syndromes. We talk about, and I mentioned how in psychology, we have syndromes or disorders. We don't have diseases for the simple fact that psychology doesn't know or posit causes for any of the mental illnesses. This is not me taking pot shots at psychology. This is just true, right? And of course, if you don't know cures, if you don't know causes, you don't have cures. All you have is treatment. Some of it's quite effective, complicated and sophisticated treatment. That's what you have. So you have this system here where there's, person engages with some kind of object. We get this really fast result of this evaluation or this experience of it as positive, negative, neutral. And then from there, we keep elaborating is the issue. The Buddhist sort of project, if you're talking about removing or ending suffering, all happens up the left end. It all happens up here, right? Whereas psychology it certainly started here. It's moving its way back, but psychology all happens here, right? For the main purpose being that in every time we engage with anything at all, that often we're not even aware that it's happened until we're well and truly into one of these emotions, and people may not even seek help until they're well and truly into the disorders, and even then they may not. So it's kind of an issue, because we're saying, oh yeah, you can meditate, and there's this contemplative technology by which you can get in here and play around with all these causes of suffering that happen here. But people aren't really who are seeking help are usually out here, and this is why my pitch is that there is this huge scope for Buddhism and psychology to kind of collaborate and support each other, because for those of us and people who need a short-term support right here, right now, because we're up, emotions out of control, or even as far as disorders and so on, all that is going, no matter how much I try to meditate and make a run for, causes of suffering, I'm going to end suffering and stuff. No matter how much I push for that, I'm going to have all these short-term interruptions in the way. And if I would remove, or at least kind of dial down those short-term interruptions, then I would have more efficacy, more power in my attempts to do these broader, bigger picture goals, which are Buddhist goals. And of course, once I start getting momentum in amongst towards those types of goals, then the short-term things will dial down too. They support each other, And what happens for most people, realistically, is the opposite. We get caught in a feedback loop where we are experiencing these short-term kind of issues, and they're in the way, and we're trying to sift through them and survive with no attempt at a long-term sort of strategy for well-being. The problem, yeah. then we develop maybe we come into Buddhism or other contemplative traditions or ideas and think, oh, this is interesting. These people do seem to have a longer term, broader plan. That's cool. I'd like to get involved, but then you start doing it and all these short-term things pop up and you don't get the results. And then people, of course, trail off their practice. This may or may not sound familiar, but here's where we're at. And my position, at least, is we can do something about that. So there are some things we can do. I want to talk a little bit about this time around. I mentioned, some of you have been here quite a lot. I've been here a few times, and every time I come and do this Buddhism science thing, I try some new pitch, some new angle. Lately, I've been talking a lot about how we might use the psychology side of things to help, because they're the short-term things right here, right now. And I think as Buddhists, we tend not to look over there to see what might help. And as people who sort of need help or relying on psychology might not necessarily have this belief that there's a long-term strategy, but I think there's a lot to be gained. And I have a lot of stuff. We'll see where we go with this. So one of the things you can do here, actually, is we can teach people about, say, anxiety and depression, for example. Actually, I forgot. I'll move through these slides because you might remember there's one last piece to this puzzle, which is that if I give something specific here, like pizza, because I like pizza, you'll remember maybe from last week saying, although I do like pizza, and we tend to think this is this one-way street through here, that actually, if I'm on my second pizza or my 20th slice of pizza, it would probably go the other way, that this thing that looks like a cause of happiness actually turns to a cause of suffering and could lead to all three of these, we decided, actually, here. So the point being that we're looking at this saying, well, psychology is looking here, and a little bit here. They're looking at the disorders. Sure, we're looking here, we're interested in these really first early on moments, but there's more to the story because what's really going on is happening here. It's happening in the interaction of these two. It's not just coming from here. It's not like, oh, there's a positive object and now I have a positive feeling, or a negative object. That's not how it works. It's my interpretation of that object at that moment in time. And this is really important. And the reason I got on about all that is because these are about mechanisms of suffering. If you can interrupt the mechanisms of suffering, you reduce suffering and eventually permanently disable them from a Buddhist perspective. Okay.
Corey,
yeah.
can I jump in and ask?
Yeah,
Someone said, can you please share your screen?
I just saw that. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, no need to be polite. That should be better, is it? Oh, that might explain why. Anyway, yes.
Yep, that's good.
Okay. So yeah, those of you who sort of missed out on that, and there's quite a few of you, sorry. You might recall this slide from last week if you were here, but the point is that we're trying to work where we spend a lot of our time from a psychology point of view at the right end of the screen, which is the end of the timeline, and the whole Buddhist project is all happening here at the left side. So why don't we harness the two? Use the technology and so on that is designed to operate down here and make really fundamental changes to the way we operate in the world, to our well-being. And sure, let's have a go at those, but we'll also try these psychology sort of interventions and ideas that are functioning up here. This is sort of where we go with. Okay. I hope that's clear. You can just speak up anytime, I hope. Oh, yeah, okay. So here's what I thought I would. Here's an example. Because yeah, here's an example. We can teach people, well, let's just take pure psych kind of idea, right? We can actually just teach people, give them information, we call it psychoeducation, about how anxiety works, even about how emotions work, and so on. This is this CEB course we were just talking about that I'm running soon. This is one of the components in it. We teach people, how these different emotions work, what they're for, and so on. And there's some clever reasons why we do this. In yeah, in yeah, no, I will tell you why. One of the reasons we do this is because there is an element of what we call emotional differentiation. The more common term these days is emotional granularity is the term. And what the sense is that the more, think about our culture, people will say, I was really emotional, and this is really not a lot of information. We don't say I was angry or sad, or I was feeling contempt or sadness or disgust or enjoyable emotions or whatever. We don't talk like that. We say, oh, I was emotional. In actual fact, if you can train people to recognize their own emotions as they happen, it has an immediate tendency overall to dial the intensity of those emotions down. It's a super interesting area of research, actually. I'm going to come into the mechanisms why, and for those mechanisms, of course, we'll flip to Buddhism, we'll see. But here's the thing. If you can start to help people see name the emotion they're experiencing, it's anger and so on, then it immediately dials down the intensity of the emotion. If you can teach people the mechanisms of the emotion and the mechanisms of, say, disorders like anxiety, same thing happens. Okay. So, for example, in the research that I have been working on as part of my PhD, here's what we did. We took 3-4 groups of people, I guess. Let me back up. Here's in the Cultivating Emotional Balance course, there are these 4 elements to it. You do this mindfulness. We also do these 4 immeasurables and like these kindness, compassion type training, also insight training, and this emotional skills training. So we just took 2 of those. We just took the mindfulness training, the attention skills training, and emotion skills. We just took those 2, and we gave them in different orders to groups. So group 1, they did 4 weeks of only mindfulness training. We didn't talk about emotions. And then they did 4 weeks of the emotion skills training. This other group did the opposite. They got 4 weeks of just emotion skills, and then we flipped them over to the mindfulness training. And then the third group was blended. They got alternate weeks. And I won't hold you in suspense. There wasn't that much difference between them. The groups were quite small. But the group that did the best was this one, which was a bit of a surprise. Group 2. So group 2 did half the amount of meditation training as everyone else, right? Because everyone else did, say, group 1, they did 4 weeks of mindfulness training, and then they kept meditating, right, for the next 4 weeks. So they did 8 weeks. This group did 4 weeks of emotion skills, and we didn't talk about mindfulness. We flipped them over to mindfulness for the last 4 weeks, and they actually did better than either of the other 2 groups. So, for example, group 1 did not significantly change in anxiety, but group 2 did. I don't know if you're into this sort of idea. The group as a whole did significantly change. Anyway, let's not go there. Having flashbacks about that. So the point is this, though, because when that happens, of course, it's fun because you get a chance to think about it. And you think about Buddhist approach, we have this idea where mostly you kind of have to do a bit of study before you really get into the nitty-gritty of the practice, right? Because you need to know what you're cultivating, how it works, and these sorts of things. And so what we did for these people is we explained how emotions work. We explained some mechanisms that I'll show you later, some mechanisms of anxiety and depression as well. And we got them to maybe make little notes about how it works for them and these things so they could tailor it to themselves. And when they understood how those mechanisms worked, and we asked them to keep checking in your day-to-day moment, like day-to-day life, just check in. Are you seeing these mechanisms? Rumination and mind wandering and worry and these other things. Are you seeing them? And so they did that for 4 weeks, and we got met every week and talked it over, and I gave them more content and so on. Of course, once you flip those people to the mindfulness training, all we have to tell them is now we're giving you skills so you can notice this stuff in real time. Up till now, it's been kind of like, you've been remembering it. It's like earlier today, I felt this. You don't necessarily know it's happening at the moment because emotions are kind of sneaky. But one of the things that the mindfulness training is designed to do is to give you that awareness of it happening in real time. So these people very quickly applied the new attention skills to their knowledge, and not as an abstract idea, but actually in real time. So if I just go back to this for a moment, you think about what they're doing. You've got one group, well, you've got this group I'm talking about, group 2. They're understanding quite well all these mechanisms and trying their best, to see them, but it's a bit hard and doesn't. And I've got to tell you, after 4 weeks, we measured them again, and there was no change in any measure. And there was a lot of measures. So there was no change, whereas the other groups did. There was no change after 4 weeks. But they knew how this worked. Then what we just did is give them some different meditation training. So they were aware of these mechanisms earlier and earlier and earlier, week to week. Right. So then by the time we measured them on the third, at the end of it all, at week 8, they had actually done better than everyone. They had significantly reduced anxiety, depression, rumination, all this stuff, more than the other groups. Does that make sense? I always get afraid, because to me, I lived with this for years, so it's kind of easy to talk about. So yeah, let me know. So the point is, when you're looking at psych ideas of how to change things, actually, psychology is not stupid. Like, it knows lots of stuff about mental processes. There's lots of information there, and we can use that actually. And when it gets combined with these contemplative technology, you get these real effects. So this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. Just learning how this works here, learning how these work and what they're for, and then do some training that helps you be aware of them in real time. That's cool. Then there's one more step, which is if I'm aware of a potentially regrettable emotional episode, I'm aware of an episode arising, an emotion arising, then you just need, what do I do? You need a plan, of course, right? So what do? You get people to write plans down. Right? You just write a plan. Hey, when do you get a bit angry? Oh, this happens. I wish I wouldn't get so angry. Cool. What could you do instead? Just write this down. I don't even need to see it. But once you've written it down, you have a plan. So now you understand the mechanisms, you have the technology to observe it while it happens, and you have a plan to intervene, right? Then in amongst all that, you think about what a meditation session is. A meditation session is essentially a series of distractions, Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's like a series of distractions. You're sort of trying to focus on one thing, and then you're getting pulled away. And what do you have to do? You have to notice that you're distracted. And then what do you do? I'll tell you what you do. You relax, release, reset. And if you train to do that in a meditation cushion, some of you are already familiar from last week and before, then you start to get that you automate that response. You get that response in the outside world. It's like, oh, I'm emotional. If you're emotional, you're distracted, because they're the same thing. What do? Relax, release, reset. So now you even have a basic contingency. And you can see here now we've got, thanks to some brilliant research and psych, work in the field of psychology, we can talk about our everyday experience in a very, very granular way. This is why you get this term, emotional granularity. We are getting more and more ideas about mechanisms. Part of my research contributed to that. But then also we're deploying this contemplative technology that wants you to get to here, but it's a bit hard to do that at first. So you train, and what you get is the payoff out here. And our job is to become more aware of our moment-to-moment experience in terms of emotions and mechanisms, right? Earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. You just keep moving to the left, right? Until eventually you're noticing this happen, and you've got mechanisms for that. We're just talking, possible mechanisms for that, which is, in Buddhist terminology, one step closer to liberation. How's that? I feel like that was a lot. It's okay. I got my one-liners. Okay. I'll just keep going. So if that's what worries me. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that was just an interesting outcome for all of us. But I got to say, if in retrospect, when I saw these results, and as soon as I saw them, they made sense. It's not what I predicted, which is fine. But as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool, actually. Those people knew how to apply it. And you think in mindfulness training, when you flip from the placement style, mindfulness meditation to the more active insight training, Vipassana training, what's the most common technique they use? The 4 applications of mindfulness, on the body and so on. So it sort of makes sense. Once you have the mindfulness training, you apply it to something. What we did for these people is give them the applications first, then we gave them the training, and away they went, right? So all of that, you might remember from last week, or if you've seen this slide before, is you have this sense here where there's an automated response. If you can interrupt, the automated response relies on your captured attention. If you interrupt captured attention down here, this is what you end up with, this sort of controlled response. And you do this, you interrupt this mechanism, say that again. You interrupt this mechanism often enough, right? This one becomes your primary response. And this happens in all sorts of places, all sorts of ways. Okay. All right. Well, no one's objecting. Yeah. So if you think about it, maybe, because I put this really, when you're talking about emotional skills, this CEB training that we do, we go through all 7 different emotions and how they work and all this sort of stuff. You develop this granularity, through the understanding them and this sense of being able to distance myself from them. There's a sense of being able to go, oh, that's anger. That seems to create a distance and more space, which means we're less controlled by it. It seems to be the outcome. There's debate as to why that is, but I have a theory. And you also teach them these mechanisms that are happening here. Why is it that fear can lead to anxiety and so on? And when you start to get all this happening, you say, well, I can recognize these emotions. I understand these mechanisms that can, exacerbate them or make it worse. So that's pretty cool that I understand that. I can retrospectively look back and say, yeah, I get it. I can see that has happened, yesterday or over previous weeks, months, years, and so on. And then I come up with a plan to interrupt it. To increase the ability to interrupt the plan, then I need to do the mindfulness training. That's what gives me the skill. Right? That's what gives me the in the moment. Okay. Okay. If that's all right, what I'm trying to make sure we do at least one session together each day. It's only 4 sessions, of course. So if you think about that as a sales pitch for meditation, basically, especially this time, this is what we're trying to do. Trying to we're trying to get whatever understanding we have about how the mind works and have that available to us in real time. Why? So we can interrupt the mechanisms that we've identified as problematic. Because of course, some mechanisms are doing great and you don't really want to interrupt them. In fact, you want to enhance them. So we go into different types. So with that in mind, I think it might be worth just rolling into a meditation session. Okay. So do you remember last week I was the posture police a little bit? If you're sitting in a chair, see those thin cushions there, you can experiment. They might be quite good behind your back. Yeah, okay. I do recommend playing around with this stuff because the chairs are a little far back, if you know what I mean. So that at least if you're in a chair, your feet are flat on the floor, you can just lean into the backrest, but your back's upright. This is what we're after. At home, if you're sitting, of course, if you are sitting on a cushion, it's best to have your hips higher than your knees. That's my only demand for you people. Okay. And I use the Insight Timer. I'm sure some of you do as well. And it started throwing up all these like inspirational quotes at the beginning. It drives me crazy. There we go. But the first thing we'll do, just develop a motivation. So if you don't have one at hand, right? This idea of being in control of what you say and do, no matter how emotional you are. We can do this for you, right? Well, at least you can do this. You may have other motivations for being here. That's great. Call all that to mind, and whatever understanding you have of how this meditation session is going to contribute to your well-being, and if you can, how that might even have a flow-on effect to the broader community. That understanding that it requires relaxation, just scan through the body, start between the eyebrows, and you're just looking for unnecessary tension. If you find it, then just linger on it. Allow it to release and move on. Spend some time becoming familiar with what it's like to find tension and have it release. From your eyebrows to your toes. And think about this as resting or settling your body into its natural state. And then just allow your awareness into the body, and you have a choice here. You can either pay attention to the movement of the body, just moving as you breathe. In fact, let's start there. And quite regularly from checking in on the body, just again, a quick scan. Is there unnecessary tension I can release? Am I distracted? I need to adjust. And then as best you can, just rest back in an uninterrupted flow of attention on the sensations of the body moving as you breathe. And at some point you notice you're distracted. This is good that you notice. Just relax, release, reset. So currently the focal object that you're attending to is the movement of the body. There is another option I'd like you just to try, just to see which one you prefer. So stay relaxed, breathing naturally, but now shift your attention so you're just aware of the sense of contact between you and the floor, the cushion, the chair. Not so much the body moving now, but that tactile sense of being in touch and contacting with the cushion. Just rest your awareness there, same as before. Body relaxed, breathing naturally, and so on. Remember, you have this tool that you can allow the exhalation to settle you if you're agitated. Just relax incrementally as you breathe out. And still using your introspection just to scan through the body. See if you're on target or off. If you need to make an adjustment or not. In this session, we have tried two focal objects, the movement of the body and the sense of contact. You probably prefer one over the other. So continue the rest of the session with the one you prefer. Everything's the same either way. Mindfulness, your attention directed towards a focal object, breathing naturally, and from time to time using your introspection to keep the body resting and your mind in its natural state of focused. Use your introspection, just scan through the body. It's not the actual practice, it's just a support. If you notice you're distracted or tense, you know what to do. Just relax, release, reset. You can allow the exhalation just to relax your body, release the mental chatter. But if you find yourself getting dull or sinking, allow that inhalation just to sharpen your focus, but without losing relaxation. You notice yourself getting agitated. Just allow that exhalation to settle you down, settle the mind, settle the body. Don't force it out, just allow it to happen to you. Relax without losing clarity is the classic instruction for that. The inhalation, well, that can help you sharpen your focus just a little, but without losing relaxation. It becomes a breath by breath affair. Focused on your focal object, but aware of the breathing, settling on the exhalation and just sharpening your focus on the inhalation. And it simply doesn't matter how often you get distracted. It only matters that you notice and interrupt it. Your attention going from captured to controlled. And then see if you can, without changing anything, just recall why you are here, why you do the practice. Control of your emotional reactions, sure. Mental health, well-being, yeah, sure. And how much can you include an aspiration that improvements in your well-being have a flow-on effect to people you encounter in the outside world? You want to feel having built a sense of momentum towards achieving that just by being here, just by controlling your own attention, resting in your natural state. Okay. All right. How's that? Any questions or comments about any of that? Nothing? I have to be more controversial, I think. Okay. All right. So here's the deal. Just to come back, last week, I would have come across these three pieces of terminology that are really important here. Mindfulness, which is just that sense of remembering or bearing in mind, introspection, which is the monitoring of that. So you're sort of just trying to keep the body, relaxed in its natural state. And also you're monitoring the state of your body, state of your mind, also monitoring your own attention to see if you're distracted and correcting for this. It's got mindfulness, introspection, and focal objects, And up to now we've used two, like this, we call these full body awareness practices. One is just being aware of the movement of the body, just any way you feel it's okay, right? Or you have this other option, which is just to attend to that sense of contact with the cushion or the chair or whatever. So you have these two options. You'll prefer one over the other most of the time, And this way, you have this choice already. You've got these, which ones you like. Over time, I mean, we've only got a few weeks, but usually, if you train in this or come work with me, we go through increasingly difficult focal objects. We make it harder and harder. So you get more and more power out of the practice. As you get better, we make them more subtle, and combine them with some other stuff. That's how it works. But in the beginning, you want to start with a nice, easy to find focal object. The body, it's okay. Realistically, if your attention's in the body, you're okay. The second you're thinking of something else or whatever, then you're distracted. So you're okay. All right. So, okay. Just want to come back to this then. This idea of share that. Here, I've been saying that this idea of granularity through psychoeducation, There's a few things actually just recently I've been reading about that made this even more clear. There's one fundamental mechanism we'll get to, right? Like from a contemplative point of view. But when you look there's a lot of research into what's called choking, like sports people doing, right under pressure, doing something they've done a million times before and blowing it. And there's some great examples in some of the literature and case studies and these sorts of things. But the upshot of it is that if you have let's take the classic example actually I read was a baseball pitcher, and I don't really care about baseball, frankly. But it's, I know what a baseball pitcher is. I'm guessing you probably do too. It's a series of movements that they've done over and over, like really thought through, to get the maximum velocity and whatever. And over time, they've done it so many times it becomes automated, like you don't have to think, right? And so sometimes there's been these examples where a pitcher's off and they're getting hit, they're not on target. And it turns out that and free throws in basketball was the other one actually that I read the most about. That actually what people do is, so they've automatized the behavior, right? So it's just, and they can just do it without thinking, and away they go. And the second they intentionally turn and analyze it, which is what they do, that's the choking. It's one with the mechanisms. So you've got this thing that you're just really natural, and it's not going quite right, and you turn and look at it, and it all goes haywire, right? It's really interesting when I was reading this, and this is just my own take on it. But as I was reading it, I was saying, oh, that's great, because the number one automatized behavior, right, that I'm always going on about is emotions. This is what emotions are. Emotions are automatized behavior, right? They just happen without us thinking about it. You don't have to try, you just go and you do, right? And why is that? Is because you've habituated, familiarized, automatized yourself with that response in that way. So these emotional reactions, these things, the behavior that we say and do, right, and think even, under the influence of emotions is automatized through repetition in the same way that a baseball pitcher or a basketball player, these people have automatized the behavior. So it only makes sense, right? That you explain to someone the timeline of an emotion, which we might get to maybe next week. We'll see if we have time for that. But if you explain to people how emotions work, and it's one of the things we do, of course, in CEB, it's the first part. And then you get people to pay attention to it, well, you're going to automatically, you're going to inherently start disrupting it in the same way. It was so interesting. I was reading this stuff on this baseball picture, and I was like, oh, baseball, really? I have a little thing about baseball. It's just kind of boring. And they make so much money, you know. Anyway, the so sort of anyway, I read it, and the more I read, I got really interested because yeah, that's the issue is when you turn and consciously attend to automatized stuff, it all goes haywire. So you take emotions, it's perfect. So you're in the middle of an emotional reaction, you go, oh, that's anger. Yeah, there's a there for sure. There's this separation happens, like a cognitive separation. It's like, oh, I'm here, and I've identified anger over there. It's kind of neat, actually. But there's more to it than that. There's all this automatized response that also gets disrupted just by paying attention to it and examining it. So, which of course has this whole crossover in insight meditation and what it's for. But anyway, so the other example was, you know, Simone Biles, she this gymnast, and she could do this stuff that no one else could do, like life-threatening stuff. It's so incredible. And the second it stopped working and she started thinking about it, it was literally life-threatening for her to try it, you know, because it just has to be repeated over and over and made into automatic response. You know? And you can automatize things, you know, like I drive here without thinking. I've driven so many times, you know. I can drive most of the way here and not really think about what I'm doing. But of course, if something jumped out in front of me or whatever, I would respond. But I don't need to. That's what automatic behavior is for. Okay. So there's one. Just by when you start to look at, you know, because I'm trying to get excited about things that happen at this end of the spectrum. Yeah. So there's one. Just by like examining and understanding your emotional reactions and these mechanisms, it seems to disrupt them. Then you do the mindfulness training and you think about, let me draw, you know, this other slide I was talking about anyway, that this captured attention is at the core of an emotional reaction, right? So you have this, you notice that your attention's captured and the emotions are up and running, and I pull my attention back and attend to what's happening, the whole thing gets disrupted. And then ideally, of course, you can change it into something more constructive. Okay. So I have to decide here. I'll do it. I'll go through this fairly quickly. So just to remind you, we're sort of interested in here now. Okay, we're going to work our way back. We're interested here now. What sort of things turn emotions, make them dysfunctional? You know, because emotions aren't dysfunctional just because they're emotions. Emotions are mostly functional and helpful. You need emotions, right? They become dysfunctional through certain mechanisms and whatever. So here's what I did. I'll try to go through this fast. I picked 3 mechanisms that let me sorry, back up. One of the big holes in mindfulness research is mechanisms. In fact, one of the big holes in psychology is mechanisms. I went through that last week, right? Taking an interest now is quite exciting. It's one of the big holes. And so for me, when I started this research project, you know, this PhD thing, started reading up on all the mindfulness research, the reviews are saying, oh, there's no research into mechanisms. It's kind of interesting. Why? Because Buddhism, like I mentioned last week, is all about mechanisms. It's all about how does it work? How can I disrupt it? You know. So I was like, oh, that's cool, right? I've got an idea about how I think mindfulness works. Anxiety, depression is kind of interesting for me. It's the most commonly researched. I've got some ideas about what those mechanisms would be, but you've got to talk in psych language, of course. So I picked these 3, rumination, mind wandering, worry, as possible mechanisms and started looking into it, right? So here's the thing, right? We know overall mindfulness, MBIs, they're called mindfulness-based interventions. So that mindfulness training seems to reduce, say, anxiety, depression symptoms. No worries, right? But the trouble is no one seems to be looking into why. So, well, okay, we know that rumination contributes to the symptoms. Maybe as simple as this: mindfulness reduces rumination, reduces anxiety. Maybe it's that simple, right? It's not that simple. Turns out it's much better than that, actually. There's two types of rumination. If you dig into the literature, this is ignored a lot, which is a bit sad because it's really clever research. You can divide rumination up into these two types, reflective and brooding. And only one of these is really related to the symptoms, which is the brooding type. So like if I'm remembering, for example, something someone said to me or whatever last week, it's easier to go in this rumination. I should have said that. Next time, well, this brooding rumination, that's what leads to mostly depression, also anxiety and others, brooding. Reflective, not so much. So you end up with this sort of relatively adaptive and maladaptive types of rumination. So maybe this is what's happening, actually. This is my new theory, right? Maybe mindfulness is mediating this. It's helping you bring people up from brooding into the reflective type. And one of the things about reflective rumination is it has a problem-solving stance to it. It's not just being mired in this, reliving this thing again, right? It's more objective, like, oh, this happened, like, what would I do next time? How can I, like, well, there's this very distant.
So it's more the sort of curiosity.
Yeah. It certainly gives you space for curiosity. Yeah. It can be inert, so it can happen and just nothing happened. You know what I mean? Like but they call it reflective, but you can have a rumination episode that kind of just dies out. And this is sort of on that adaptive side. But yes, there's room for curiosity and problem solving and so on. Of course, it still doesn't explain why it would do this, but we come to that. That was the part that got my thesis over the line. Mind wandering, right? Anyone who's meditated got to be interested in mind wandering, right? You just have to be, I think. We know that same deal. Mindfulness leads to symptomology. Mind wandering also does. We know this, right? So maybe it's this simple, just as before. No, it's not that simple. It's better. There's two types of mind wandering. Again, mostly ignored in the literature, which is disappointing. Right? Two types, deliberate, spontaneous. Only one of these types is really strongly related to negative outcomes, this spontaneous type. If I had my way, I would change the names of these to lucid and non-lucid. This is what they call them, deliberate and spontaneous. And then it's just exactly the same thing I said before, but now with mind wandering instead of rumination. There's an adaptive type and a maladaptive type. So you sort of have this kind of more overall sort of look. Is it that perhaps mindfulness and emotion skills, but certainly mindfulness is perhaps mediating and drawing people out from the maladaptive to the more adaptive. And maybe this is actually the mechanism that's going on, right? Is this okay? Yeah. Also worry is slightly different. I haven't included it this time.
Well, so I can see a really good correlation there. If you knew about the emotional skills.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, great. You sort of know this is brooding, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then I need to do something.
Yeah, I think and that's the part that I think we miss, is that you say to people, what if you could balance your emotions and have them working for you? What if emotions, were working the way they were supposed to, which is functional and helpful and adaptive. And everyone thinks, yeah, well, that way, when I meet this person or come into that situation, or, when I encounter this, that, or the other, I would be more balanced. And it's cool. It's a nice way to think. But there's this whole other domain of emotional triggers in the mental domain that we sort of don't immediately think of. I think of my annoying neighbor or my this or that or the other. I don't have annoying neighbors. I should give a different example, in case there were. So yeah, but actually there's this, and that's what they are, so if I have this, if there's this, my boss said something to me that I wish I'd responded differently to, then it sets off that emotion, remembering it sets off the emotional reaction. That emotional reaction turns into brooding rumination, and it just turns into a downward spiral that it's a trajectory towards depression and anxiety, right? So these things that happen in the past. Mind wandering, more about the future generally, like this. Yeah, and worry is another one, we'll look at that as a separate.
Or
yeah,
you're talking about the other experiment where you look at almost theory and practice, like mindfulness and this almost seems to me anywhere for me in rumination that I've had, understanding the step before this along your spread out chain, the mechanism for why I was ruminating and the things I was ruminating on allowed the mindfulness of rumination.
Exactly.
To come back a step.
exactly. So I can just, it's not very often someone says something where I have a slide for that coming next, but I do. So I'm pretty excited about that, actually. Yeah, so that's right. And because the mind wandering rumination mechanism is here, like that's it there mostly, well. But if you understand the emotions as they happen, like you're saying, which mindfulness gives you the opportunity to do, then yeah, you totally have this extra power to kind of subvert or change and especially towards this sort of trajectory towards brooding rumination or worry or whatever it might be, this maladaptive outcomes we say. Yeah, of course. And yeah, so once you teach people anxiety, teach them about mechanisms, teach them about emotions, and then ramp it up with mindfulness training, you can see maybe the power now. And the fun part about this for me that I get excited about is that we've taken mindfulness training as it exists in the Indo-Tibetan tradition unchanged. We haven't added things like non-judgmental sultana eating or anything, right, to it. We've just kept it the way it was. But then we've pulled out just straight up psych research out of journals and applied them together, and not only is it going to help you if you're not Buddhist to maybe get your emotions under control, dial down anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. If you are Buddhist, it's going to help you remove roadblocks to really making a push to the end of suffering, which is what you're trying to do, right? But you don't have to talk about that if you don't, this is the beauty of it for me, the way it all just seems to come together like this. Yeah. All right. So how are we doing? I'm just going back. Any other ideas, questions, outbursts, objections? I'm quite fond of objections. No.
This is the cascading with
Which one? The rumination you mean, or the?
So if you took everything from the arrow after 40,
Yeah.
you could actually apply that to the next step and then the next step, and you can actually have, like say, I'm thinking about going back and say, I've got an email from my boss that upsets me.
Uh-huh.
Right? I follow it back until I realise someone else has actually made me sensitive to that. Now I can follow that up again, maybe it's a child trauma that created the problem. You almost go back through that series you've got there 2 or 3 times before you get the pause.
Exactly. So you're saying, just for the people online, that you can start to trace this back, that you have an initial, you can say, oh, I got upset because of this, but actually there might be other, an email from, upsetting email, for example. But then there might be something else that's contributing to that. And then you just keep going back and back. And of course, and so that's where this issue, that I sort of got started on last week, where we think that this thing here, this core is the subject, this thing is the object, and that all this happens, and that it's dependent on the object, but it's not. It's dependent actually on the interaction. And there's all sorts of factors, and factors as really as dumb as how much pizza I just ate, that can actually cause this whole cascading thing of ongoing issues. So it's not, and it's not about it's not about the object. And this is I guess actually, thank you, because this is a good point. One of the themes, if you like, that we're pushing, or I was pushing in, I still am in this research, is building on other people. That essentially, right? So we're talking about rumination, mind wandering, and so on. Essentially, the content of the mental activity, the content of rumination isn't the issue, right? It's the relationship of to that content is the issue. This is a big deal, and it's a very difficult truth, actually, uncomfortable truth, perhaps, in some ways. That actually, say it again, it's not the content of your mind, it's not the content of your mental activity that causes any distress, it's your relationship with that content. And so that's why you might have an upsetting email from someone, from the boss, perhaps, and it's the difference between reliving it and thinking how I should have responded or could have responded or will respond, versus like really caught up in the moment or reliving it, versus having some kind of problem solving stance towards it, where it's sort of more objective, and it's not an emotional But to put it down to this, it's you have this same object. I have an email, the memory of an email from my boss, let's say, right? And that same email may or may not elicit an emotional reaction. Is that all right? Sometimes I could remember it, not get emotional. Sometimes I can remember it and be furious. Same email. What's changed? The email? No, your relationship with the relationship with your memory of that email. Where does the memory exist? In the mental domain. It's a mental thing, right? So if you come back to these, can I do that? Come back to these sorts of things, although I think rumination is what I'm working on at the moment. Oh, that's a lot more slides than I remember. That's what's going on here. So perhaps I have some particular object, something someone said to me, an email that arrived. We don't have to get too, obviously there can be more higher stakes things, you know. And when that happens, perhaps it's the mindfulness training that mediates or determines whether or not my remembering this episode is maladaptive or adaptive. It's that simple. And I'll go further and say, yeah, there's a mechanism here that Buddhism has clearly identified that does this, and psychology is coming around in very exciting ways. We'll do more on that next week. Yes, please. There are some people who believe this, but it's basically, so sorry, the question is, you know, in relation to trauma, and it's an important topic, and I'm not trying to belittle any of this. In relation to trauma, isn't it the case that there is this strong relationship with the body? I'm okay by saying, yes, there is a strong relationship between, say, the memory of the episode and the physiological response, 100%. There is, frankly, delusionary idea that trauma exists in the body. There's a Vessel Vander, what's it? This guy, he's written this book that we should all ignore, I think, called, does anyone remember?
It's something that lives in
The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah. I recently ran a course on science, Buddhism stuff, and there was this nun actually attending, and all these people had told her she should read this book, and she said, I've never been so angry from reading the book, you know, because she's Buddhist, right? And so, you know, memories don't exist in the body, right? And that would, past and future lives are finished if memories exist in the body. There's a real problem, right, for a Buddhist. And no one in the science side of things can establish that to be true, let's be clear. So we're stuck in this impasse at the moment for the time being. Yeah. I mean, if memories exist in the body, yeah, past and future lives don't exist. The whole Buddhist thing is just done, right? It's really the stakes are quite high for Buddhists, you know. If that's the case, then anyway, sorry, no, I'll wait till you're more familiar with me before I go that far. Okay. Is that all right? I'm not trying to upset anyone. In fact, maybe I should just hang here for a moment, because here's the deal. Here's the thing, we can have particular experiences in the past that can create post-traumatic stress, right? And the same incident will not always do the same for different people, even at the same event, you know, they don't, it's quite interesting. And so there's lots of interesting research into that. In fact, why don't I just settle in? For example, well, because I'm just aware of this research, you know, and I know it's not what I planned to talk about, but that's okay. For example, and you can find this, I can find a lot of this research in a book called Chatter by a psychologist called Ethan Kross, I'm quite fond of. I've just come across him recently. I'll put that in the online thing, you know, I'll put that up. So, for example, there's a sense that we have emotional kind of needs, if you like, and cognitive needs. And so when I'm in distress, really what I'm looking for is someone who understands the emotion that I'm experiencing, right? Someone's like, yeah, I get it, you know, your emotion's cool, like, you know, someone's who's with me. But research will show, and these natural experiments like 9/11 and so on, where people looked into this, people who are constantly sharing how they're feeling about traumatic incidents and so on, tend to do better in the short term and absolutely no better in the long term than people who didn't. right? It really is super interesting work. So this idea that like right here and now, but there's emotional and cognitive needs, and cognitive needs are deeper and more important. But you know, if once you're in an emotional state, the emotions are going to prevent you getting around to these cognitive needs, which are some sort of meaning, some sort of understanding, some sort of plan to move forward. You know, these are all in the cognitive sort of space. I just here. So when you're thinking about something like trauma, which is really important, you know, area, right? Let's say there's a traumatic event in the past, and that has led to post-traumatic stress for people, someone. Then here's the thing. We have, let's say, what do you think the cause of that post-traumatic stress is? Would you say it's the memory of the event? So if you remember the event and then it starts to set off this re-experiencing, what would you say it is? And online, you're welcome to type in. I would say it is. So that would be my position.
Yeah.
Say, a belief it could happen again. Yeah, actually, that would be entwined with it for sure. But you know, people post-traumatic stress, people often relive it. You know, but they so that I remember it, and then I go into this whole visceral, like this idea of the body, you know, the physiological response. So really, it's that sort of memory, and a lot of, you know, some people's position is if we could remove those memories from people, we could cure PTSD, which is just a little bit, you know, misguided. So I'm trying to be polite, right? Because I don't like, you know. So someone said, yeah, Susan, could it be a bodily reaction to the trauma? Sure. But here's the thing, this gets problematic. It's a good example of the mud you get in when you're in psychology, because they don't really define their terms very well. This is a real problem. So what is trauma? Is trauma an event that happened in the past, you know? Or is trauma your memory of the event that happened in the past? We have to define all this stuff. Otherwise we can't fix it. And before anyone answers, because I don't want to, you know, you know, let's be clear, events in the past don't exist, right? Because they've gone. So for example, Toronto Maple Leafs yesterday, they lost brutally, right? In game 4. You know, but that event no longer exists, right? But the event finished. So it's gone. It's not like I can go pull it up and go, here's the event. I can't. I can pull up representations of the event. I can watch the replay, I can remember it, right? I can show you the scores. I've got all these representations of the event, but the event is finished and gone, and it will never be back. It doesn't exist. Is this all right? Yes, no?
You're not saying that because it no longer exists, the effects of it don't exist.
Effects is ongoing, yeah.
That's right, they're ongoing.
It's the event, yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah, but the neurological imprint of the event is still in your brain.
Yep. Let's assume memories are in the brain, right? Again, this is an assumption. This is an untested assumption, right? Like, let's be clear. We don't know that to be true. Heavily involved in retrieval and encoding of memories, 100% agree. Memories in the brain, let's pretend nobody knows and just ignore Buddhism and 2,500 years of peer-reviewed efforts to find where memories are located. Let's ignore that. So let's just say that's true. There's a neurological imprint. That is nonetheless a representation of something that happened. It's not the thing. This is my point. It's not the thing. You cannot relive that event again. You can experience representations of that event, no problem. Especially nowadays, everything's been videoed, everything, right?
You can change the representation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, you can not only change the representation, but this comes back to what I was saying before. More importantly, you can change your relationship with the representation. So then the issue comes around, well, what is trauma? So Emily's asking EMDR, how does that work here? To me, that just seems like EMDR. Yeah, I don't know much about it, to be honest. So I have to just plead ignorance on that. I'm not sure of the longevity of those results with the EMDR. I understand they have short-term results. I'm not sure about the longevity. So, well, good. Thanks. Hey, thanks for the. I've just got to catch up with you all. So Sue said the last time you remembered it. What's the? Sorry, I must have said something. The last time you remembered it. Is that what trauma is? Is that what you're suggesting here? Because this is really. Can you see the problem, right? Everyone says, "What about trauma?" I'm like, yeah, this is really important. So what's trauma? And no one can answer. It's really. So I'm going to say, well, I would say that that a trauma is instigated by an event or a series of events. I think that's okay. I think everyone's going to. I mean, I'm okay with that. I think that's all right. When those events finish, they no longer exist, right? But the person still experiences trauma 100%. And in fact, I should be clear, those events are extremely important, right? Just because they don't exist isn't belittling them, right? It's like, oh, World War II doesn't exist anymore. No, it was kind of important, you know. So yeah, it doesn't exist, but it's important, and the effects are ongoing. So then so what do I get? You're gonna roll your eyes. Are you ready? What do we look at? We look at the mechanism. What's doing it? And we need to know, because there's groups of people experience the same thing and only some have PTSD, right? Not just the same type of thing, but the same thing, right? They were the same event, for example, and some have post-traumatic stress and some don't. You know, some have it and get rid of it and then lose it. You know, it happens. So I'm putting to you that the issue is going to be the relationship of the person with the memory of the event or series of events. This is the issue. It's your relationship with it. It can't be it, because everyone would experience it the same. So it has to be the relationship with it. And this starts to be, I mean, people can get, I have experienced this when people think I'm belittling the events, but I'm not. You know, it's that right now my relationship with the memories of those events is what's causing me the problem. Right?
Be careful with memory, because it can become so automatic and automated that you not remember anything.
Yeah, and that's where this, yeah. So that's where this mechanism comes in, which I'm gonna have to just get to now. This is, okay. This is why I bring notes in there, because I need to ignore them. And I was coming with a plan every time, some of you know. And then eventually, I leapfrog and jump in front. That's what's happened, but I just gonna have to follow through, I guess. So it's still the memory. So for example, I can have had been under so much stress, and this returned veterans especially, you know, that I'd get really suspicious and anxious all the time. You know, there's these covert triggers is the term sometimes we use. They're just things in the environment you might not even be aware of that set off this response, but it is coming from a series of events and experiences in the past that are being set off covertly, you know, is the term. And so, there is that for sure. Emily's saying your perception of the event. Yeah, sure. This is good. This is good. Your perception of the event at the time definitely is part of the problem, but you got to remember the event no longer exists. Neither does your perception of the event. What you have is a perception of your memory of the event. Now all we have are representations of it. Is all we have. And I'll put it to you, and this is that the representations are malleable. You can change them. You can certainly change your relationship with them. So so I just have to do this. I have to skip through some slides because I did bring them in. And I'll come back to this next week, which is fine. Where are you? Okay. Let's do it this way. Am I sharing? No. This will give us all something to think about till next week too. I can't remember if I did this last week or not. I get confused when I do lots of presentations. So imagine you're this person or even this person, right? And you're meditating. Your conditions are quite good. Things are going well, right? Good conducive conditions. Okay, as I was saying, everything's going well. It's a pity because I could have timed that better. So things are going well, and then while you're doing this, without you knowing, right? I play for 5 seconds. I play my favorite heavy metal guitar solo at full volume, right? While you're meditating. My question to you is, how long do you think that might distract you for? Possibly. Just give me a rough estimate, if you like. 10 seconds? Wow.
Depends how much you get into it. If you get right into it, 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, you imagine, so you're meditating here and then full bore, like louder than that siren, heavy metal guitar solo, and it stops. And then how much are you, yeah. How long can that? Okay, a minute. That's pretty good. Some people are like, I'd be angry next week. No, right. Yeah, well, here's the issue is, of course, the maximum amount of time it can distract you is 5 seconds, right? Everything that happens after that is literally nothing to do with me. Why? Because I press stop. I played 5 seconds of my favorite heavy metal, which I don't even have one, to be honest. I did a degree in jazz performance, but that's not the point either. So you get this 5 seconds, but once I press stop, right? Now it doesn't exist. And here's the great thing: things that don't exist cannot distract you, right? Things that don't exist can't harm you. Things that don't exist, right? And it doesn't exist. So how is it that I might remain emotional or distracted once it's stopped, right? Is because my mental representation of the event is still very strong. But there's more to it than this, right? I treat what I do is I take the mental representation of the event and treat it as the event. Here's the issue. Now the rubber hits the road, right? We call it cognitive fusion, or more and more in psychology, it's called reification. So I've sort of flipped over to talk about it. I usually call it reification now. And this is a mechanism at the heart. I'll go into this in more detail next week because this became a big linchpin of my whole thesis, that's what happens. We have this incredible capacity as humans to take mental representations, which I'm going to put it to you while I'm on a roll. Mental activity is harmless. All mental activity of any type ever that's ever happened in human history ever, right? Do you get the idea? All of it, without exception, is harmless. It has no causal efficacy. It can't do anything. The only time it can be powered up to have some kind of effect and develop and elicit an emotional response is when we take the mental representation and treat it as the event. In this case, let's say you take the memory and treat the memory as an event. This is the issue. Why? Because, let me ask you, is a memory of an event the event? No, it can't be, right? So the only way I can have a memory of an event that brings out a reaction as if I'm experiencing the event is reification. You can keep doing it. You can do this over and over and over. I guarantee if this is the first time you're hearing this, the implications have not sunk in, right? So, you can just look anywhere. You can do it with mental imagery, I can just call up a mental image of my mother, right? And if any degree of, we can all agree, the mental image of my mother is not my mother. That's okay, I think, yeah. So if I have an emotional reaction as if she's here, right? That's reification. It's treating the mental image as, we call it the referent. So I have a mental image of my mother. It refers to my mother who's in Adelaide, right? So what happens is I treat the representation as the referent, right? And it's not binary. It's like a 0 to 100 scale. So the degree to which I reify the mental image is the degree to which I will have a reaction as if she's here, right? Actually, I did this once years ago, talked about this, and my mother was on Zoom. And literally, as I walked, I was living on the coast and I stayed overnight and I was walking down and my goes, ping, and it's my mum. Just what kind of reaction do you have? Good. But does this start to make sense, right? Like this mechanism, and what is it? It's a mechanism. This is the mechanism, right? It happens all the time. We can just keep doing it. You can just keep doing it. If I'm, I don't know, at a cafe having breakfast, you know, and there's a child throwing a tantrum, yeah, I'll tell you what it looks like from my side, and you can quietly agree or not. It looks to me as if I have like a naughty child, right? As if I have a quote bad child. That's the appearance. But it's not really the issue, is it? Because there's a child and the child's behavior, right? And they're not the same thing, okay? They can't be, right? Why? Because there's an apostrophe. Once you put the apostrophe in, you're done. The child's behavior. It's behavior that belongs to the child. That's how grammar works, you know. So there's two things. There's a child and the child's behavior. And which of those is causing me some kind of upset? The child or the behavior? The behavior, right? So the behavior happens, which has causes and conditions and can be understood, right? So that happens. But then I have a negative feeling, if you think back to my slide. So it brings out a negative feeling. And I take the negative feeling and I fuse it as a quality of the child, right? And what happens is there's the appearance of a bad child, even though it's not what's happening. What's happening is the child's behavior is causing this unpleasant response. And then I impute out onto the child. So, but my experience, just like the pizza, right? Just like these things, the appearance becomes from its own side, there's a naughty child, but it's not what's happening. You know, there's cause. I'm married to an early childhood expert, so it's totally different for her. She would look around, figure it out, could probably settle it quite quickly, you know. But not me, because I don't know anything about I really know anything about kids. So you can just keep going with this again and again. What if you have a president of a country, right? And they are doing objectionable things. Is the president the same as the objectionable things? No. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. The implications are enormous, right? You don't have a bad person, you have a person doing objectionable things. Right? So then I take the objectionable things and I treat it as a bad person. And here's the thing, if you have a bad person, if you have a bad child, you give up. There's nothing you can do. Forget it. Just have a bad child, you're done. If you have behavior with causes and conditions that can be altered, that's entirely different. So this is where you keep going. And then the upside of this whole, which is equally as annoying, is if there's no bad people, there's also no good people. There's just people. Would it be cruel to end there? I mean, that's sort of like we don't have to. But I'm going to just drive back here, and you've got a week to think about this. You can contact me through the. We'll look at all this next week. This all gets. I want to go back to the. So I'm going to put. I present this. That actually, when you look at these things. So here we got mind wandering. The same is true for rumination, as you know. Here's my pitch to everyone, including everyone, that in actual fact, what determines the reason mindfulness training seems to push people from the spontaneous into the deliberate category, which it does because we've got peer-reviewed research on this, right? So you come along and say this, Corey wants to know, I want to know, what mechanisms are at play when mindfulness drives down anxiety and depression. This is how it started, right? So, okay, let's look into rumination. Cool, maybe that's it. Oh, there's two types of rumination. Maybe mindfulness mediates the types of rumination. That's even if it does, which my results and others, but my research says it does, right? It still doesn't explain why. It actually still doesn't explain why, right? It's a step in the right direction in the research field, but you know, for people like me who are a bit obsessive and fanatical, it's not enough, right? Reification explains it entirely. In fact, reification is the end game. Once you get to this, there's no, actually, you don't even have to look any further. This is the issue. When I'm having a memory of something, or when I'm thinking of something in the future, or I'm worrying about an event that hasn't happened yet, and so on, what's happening is I'm taking a mental representation of a non-existent thing, right? And I am treating it as the thing. And then I react as if it's here. The degree of reification is the degree to which your mental activity is adaptive or maladaptive in certain cases. It's not. You can It's not entirely can play with that. So is that like attachment to the emotion of the representation, with reference to your mother, or reference to a negative feeling or a negative event? Yeah, attachment to the emotion of the representation. Not quite how it works, Emily. Like the mechanisms are a bit different. Attachment isn't necessarily. Attachment's problematic. Maybe we'll come to that next week because it's fun to talk about that stuff. Because here's the thing, maybe this will help just for now. That so I'm talking to you like you're the chat, talking to the chat box. Sorry. The one, because you think about like this, attachment and aversion or anger, or have in Buddhism these three poisons. Attachment, for example, comes from overestimating the potential of an object, right? It overestimates the good quality of an object. And then I pursue it with an expectation of a particular payoff I'm not going to get because I've overestimated. This is attachment. You need to overestimate it, right? Jodokpa, it says in Tibetan, there's this overestimation. Well, that overestimation is cognitive fusion, is reification. It's like someone presents a piece of pizza and my idea of this pizza is it will give me happiness. I reify this pizza. I go, this. So I know that pizza may or may not cause happiness and may in fact cause suffering. I know this intellectually, but then you present it to me, right? And then I have this mental representation going on. Oh, this is a source of happiness that I reify, I fuse onto the pizza, and away I go. This is how attachment works. Aversion works in the opposite direction, overestimating the negative of something. So again, always reification is at the heart of this, and you'll find. Right, just to maybe I'll finish here. In fact, I will finish here. It's not very controversial. I mentioned last week, essentially, our whole experience of the world happens in the mental domain. This is uncontroversial. Quantum physics, Buddhism, cognitive psychology, neuroscience, no big deal, right? We can all look at the same object, experience it differently. Fine, okay. Why is that? Because we live with our own interpretation of things. That's okay. What we do, though, is I take my interpretation of things, right? And I think it's reality. I think it's an objective reality. And I reify my interpretation as being an objective reality out there. And what happens now is the person next to me, who I know intellectually is experiencing it differently, tells me they're experiencing it differently, and I think they're wrong. Because I've reified my interpretation as the stuff that's going on out there, which is not. And even though I know it's not, it's hard to get around because it happens so fast. Which comes back to this idea. It's why I presented this timeline, cognitive events is a timeline. Because one of the things that mindfulness training does is it starts to give us access more and more and more to the left of the timeline. And once you can access that, then, last week I was saying, then when you can access that and focus really intently on those mechanisms, you can start throwing really well-timed, accurate spanners into those mechanisms to disrupt them. You can also ramp some up in terms of compassion, kindness, and so on. Okay, but there it is. I was not going to go there today. I was going to try to go 2 whole sessions without bringing reification in, because it's like my pet topic, but I didn't make it. I hope that makes sense. I know a lot of you did sign up, so I will drop some supporting content on this into that space. You can contact me by email or also through the app or as well. And I guess that's where we'll start. Next week, we're going to come on to more mechanisms again. And what we're going to find is that there are really interesting mechanisms you can disrupt. We can find them, but this reification just keeps underlying the whole thing. There is no aspect of your experience is unaffected by this. No aspect of it at all, including your own identity. Yeah. So it's probably worth paying attention to. And kudos to psychology for picking up, because they're doing some cool stuff. Okay, sorry, you're free to go. I've got started. We'll just keep going. So you're all free to go. If those of you online, if you haven't, I will put that slide up perhaps. Or just get in touch with me. I'm going to dump extra content that you can access that as we go, including the meditations from the sessions. But get out, or I'll just keep going.